Hello there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. You're here with myself, Laz, and Felipe to my right. How's it going, man?
All good. Hello, everyone.
We are in Exeter. We're ready to play a show on the way down to Cornwall tomorrow, I believe. So we're just at a halfway point, stopping off. For the Friday night. Going to go out for some drinks after we do this. So yeah, should be nice and fun.
Yeah, it will be fun. Yeah,
excellent. Right, today's episode is an album-specific episode, and for once, so far in 14 episodes, we are doing a true rock and roll album.
Rock and roll, yeah. Not hard rock, not classic rock.
Not classic rock, not hard rock that we are putting a spin on being as rock and roll. This is rock and roll as it gets. We are doing, arguably we are doing the first out-and-out rock and roll album ever. We are doing Elvis Presley's first album, which is titled Elvis Presley, which is just, fantastic album. I mean, I can't wait to get stuck into it. I'll start off as usual with the Laz facts. The album's called Elvis Presley. The artist is Elvis Presley. It was released in mid-March 1956. What do you want to do first? I mean, should we talk about the history of the album, or do you want to get stuck into the songs?
Well, do you know what? I want to talk about my impressions about this album.
Go for it. Let's do it.
I want to hear about yours.
We've done it a little differently this time, which we're quite excited about, because Felipe's listened. We've both listened to the album, obviously, but Felipe's listened to it with his musical hat on. So when he talks about songs, he's going to talk about some musical aspects of it. And I have done a shitload of research on everything that led up to the recording and the release of the album, so it should be quite a nice dynamic today.
Well, let's see what sort of information we got here. But the one thing I notice a lot in this album is you can hear Elvis' acoustic guitar playing quite loud in the mix. So it is, in a certain way, a proper solo act album. So you got his acoustic guitar and his vocals, and I would dare to say, if you remove everything else, it would still sound good. It would be a bit like Robert Johnson kind of thing. Obviously, the band makes a huge difference, and it wouldn't be as rock and roll without the proper arrangements. But you can hear the power of the compositions, you can hear the power of the song by just listening to his acoustic guitar and vocals, and they're quite evident in the recording. So
do you think the band made this album better, or just changed it in a sense?
It made it better, and it enhanced the vibe of the acoustic guitar and vocals. But you still have the acoustic guitar as a rhythmic instrument
that he was playing himself.
Yeah, played quite played pretty much like a percussion instrument. Yeah. His right hand's really strong in the album. You can hear there's this mashing the guitar and singing. So Elvis was a good musician as well. We got to remember that. Mm-hmm. He had perfect control of his vocal range and his vocal technique, and he could play the guitar well enough to groove with the band. So that's one thing. One thing that for me is remarkable is the arrangements are simple. Like what we're talking about is like, there is a band, they're great musicians, they do a great job, but they do not get in the way of the main thing, which is Elvis's vocals more than anything else. The guitar solos are really short. All of them well played, all creative. I don't know if
all on electric guitar as well.
Electric guitar, and they're really short. And you can hear right there on Elvis' first album his main vocal characteristics. Some vibratos and the way he keeps the notes going for a bit longer, and dynamics as well. I think his vocals got loads of dynamics. This is probably one of the reasons why he communicates so well with the audience at the time, specifically with female audiences as well. It's like he's talking in your ears, he's whispering, and then he shouts, and then he gets back to that whisper. So he
does what the song needs him to do.
Exactly. He goes along with the song, and sometimes the song is like a minute and a half, 2 minutes long, and he does all of that. He uses all those resources that he had as a singer.
Interesting. You said something about the song length. I mean, the whole album length is 28 minutes and 3 seconds long. That's a short album, but I think that's kind of to be expected in the 1950s. Albums were shorter back then. I don't think they'd learned how to press so much onto vinyl. They hadn't sort of had the technology to be able to make an EP that lasted for an hour.
There's nothing. There's no innovation in terms of keeping the songs short and sweet. I'm saying because everyone was doing that at the time.
I see.
But the thing is, following that format, how can you deliver so much with so little time? How long is the whole album? You probably got that.
Yeah, 28 minutes.
28 minutes. That's it. The whole album.
The whole album's 28 minutes.
So that's it. And
there's 12 so tracks, I think, which is about an average of 2 minutes 20 per song.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Long, yeah, exactly.
It's funny because I'm familiar with loads of Elvis's songs, and I consider myself a fan even without knowing that much about every single album, right? Yeah. So it's the first time I guess I've actually listened to this album carefully, start to finish. And as soon as I finished, I was like, I want to listen to it again and again. So I was kind of, listening to some songs.
I think it's really interesting with people like Elvis. You've got to remember the amount of albums he'd released and the amount of soundtracks that he did for movies. It almost became, I don't want to say impossible to listen to an album, but if you say Elvis, you know the hits. You know Jailhouse Rock, you know Heartbreak Hotel, you know Blue Suede Shoes, you know Suspicious Minds. I don't think many people could tell you which albums they're on because they're part of his great hits.
That's what I'm thinking, like, so I didn't know that some of those songs were already in his first album. So many hits right away. How he was so young at the time. And you look at the other thing we must mention is the album cover. That's iconic. And it's being emulated by the Clash, isn't it?
London Calling.
So two iconic album covers which are the same.
But one was definitely done based on the other.
Exactly. No, exactly. Elvis did that, and the Clash, they were like, okay, we're going to do a almost like a piss take of that. But it is what it is. But it's so iconic that you look at that cover, and there's not much to it. It's a black and white picture of him, and you can see him
a live photo.
And it's him playing live, and with his mouth open, like he's shouting the chorus or something.
There was never a piece of art like that before. There was never an album cover that looked like that.
Exactly, and it's like it's almost it's almost hard rock for the time for that.
Well,
for the standards of the time.
You see, so at the time, this would be a good place to talk about some of the history of it. At the time, rock and roll was still mainly being played by black people. And so because of that, and because of the segregation in society at those times, it wasn't chart-topping.
I see,
black people playing rock and roll were not top-topping
They needed kind of a white face to sell more, to be commercially acceptable.
Jazz and big band music was still chart-topping at those times.
And it happened, the same thing happened with jazz before it happened with rock, which is black artists wouldn't get to the top of the charts, even if their music was way superior than the white guys. And some of the white bands, like 100% white bands, would do the same songs, and they would make it to the top of the charts. The industry wasn't prepared to accept everyone, and people were not doing it right. I mean, it's like, how can you possibly imagine, in this day and age? Because I think we got to a point in the music industry that you have a big diversity of people from all over the world, being successful, which it wasn't the case at the time. So do you think they were looking for a white face for black music? Is that what you think?
Actually, it's really interesting you say that, because I actually watched the Classic Albums episode of this album on TV yesterday. And what I'd learned and what I had no idea before is one of two things. One, Elvis was born into poverty. He had a very, very poor family. He himself was poor. He couldn't even afford music to listen to. He could only ever listen to music through the radio. So the music he was listening to was a lot of black rock and roll. And the second thing that I didn't know about Elvis was how much time he spent in black communities in Memphis. So he grew up, actually, I'm not sure if he grew up, but he spent a lot of time on this road called Beale Street in Memphis. And I believe that is where the producer of this album, Sam Phillips, bought the Sun Studios, where they recorded the majority of this album. But anyway, Elvis was spending a lot of time in Beale Street, and he was encountering the black gospel, the soul music, the R&B that the black community and the black musicians were producing at this time.
So that explains a lot why his vocal was so gospel, and it's so...
and why his music overall, not just the vocal, the way he sort of went about playing the songs. And it's really interesting because Sam Phillips, I got a quote here, Sam Phillips, who was the producer and also the owner of Sun Studios at this time, said this. Now, how brilliant is this? if I could find a white boy that could sing like a black man, then I'd have something.
It's because they knew that would be commercially accepted.
Exactly.
And it would be a massive hit.
Well, I think people,
and,
like
of
you
course,
said...
they had... I mean, he wasn't the first, but he was the first white guy to actually get to the top and stay at the top. Like
performing black music, essentially.
Black music,
because like you said, it happened with jazz, and it happened with blues, and it's happened with rock and roll. The black communities and the black musicians, they were pioneering and innovating these musics.
Yeah.
But it wasn't being commercially successful.
Yeah.
So it wasn't becoming commercially successful. So people like Sam Phillips, and there's another character here, a guy called Colonel Tom Parker, who was actually Elvis's manager.
Yeah.
These guys were identifying the fact that, do you know what? These black musicians, they're onto something with this rock and roll. This is good. But
we need to sell it. We need,
but
you need
no
to sell
one
it
thought
to
it would sell it.
the white middle class people.
But because it was black, in quotation marks, because it was black lower class music, people wouldn't accept it. So it was a massive risk for Elvis to essentially start recording black music.
Oh, so that was a massive.
It was a huge risk. Let me tell you how much of a risk this was. 1955, Colonel Tom Parker put a $35,000 price on Elvis's head.
Wow.
Which means, sorry, that sounds like it sounds like an assassination, doesn't it? If you wanted to record Elvis at your studio, it would cost you $35,000. Sam Phillips took the punt, paid the $35,000.
A lot of money for
think about it, in 1955,
wow, that's
man.
A lot of money.
35. But again, Colonel Tom Parker, what a businessman.
Yeah.
He knew what he had in his arsenal. He knew that Elvis, regardless of what he did, was going to be successful in some form or another. So Sam Phillips took the punt. I must mention, Elvis had been to Sun Studios before in the previous 2 years. So this album, we'll talk about some of the songs, but a lot of song names that come up with this album are Shake, Rattle and Roll, Heartbreak Hotel. They're the two most famous ones. Heartbreak Hotel would go on to sell 2 million copies, which is about 1,700,000 more than the album would go on to sell, because people bought singles in those days. It wasn't essentially normal to buy an album. Singles were what were popular. So those songs, Shake, Rattle and Roll, what was the other one I said? Heartbreak Hotel. Those were recorded in between 1954 and 1955. They used them essentially as demos for this album, as for what they wanted the sound to be like, but they couldn't match the sound. So that's why they're not on the album. So Heartbreak Hotel and Shake, Rattle, had everything been okay, if we were in today's age and you could use technology to your advantage, they'd all be on that album. But the sound was so different. The quality of the microphones they had in 54 and 55 were different than what they got in 56. So they just said, this quality's not up to the standard we want. We'll put these ones out as singles, Shake, Rattle and Roll, Heartbreak Hotel, and we'll do 12 new songs, which is the album we have in front of us.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, and those two singles were massive, you know.
As well. And
so he had a great start to his career.
That introduced people and kickstart Elvis's career in that sense, if you like. So yeah, I mean, in the lead up to the recording, Elvis was. I mean, here's a really cool story. Him and his girlfriend at the time, they would be in church on Sundays, and they'd sneak out of their white church to go to the black church and listen to them sing gospel.
Again, they were doing their research, exactly, that's what we want to do. That's what
Elvis
we want to be part of this. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean,
interesting.
After hearing all this, can you believe? I mean, does it? You know, it's not very unbelievable that his music sounds gospel, does it?
Well, his vocals are gospel through and through. I mean, there's no way to not compare him to a gospel singer. You know, you can't imagine him singing in the church all the time, even when he's singing about women and having fun and whatever, you know. So it's a soulful voice, and you can tell that. And he doesn't have a massive vocal range. That's what I believe is quite impressive, is the way he uses it. He doesn't go really high, you know. So he stays in kind of a low, medium range. I'm not going technical about this. I'm just saying you can tell in the album he doesn't go to really, really high notes or anything like that. It's about the expression. It's about the dynamics, the breathing, and the time, the way he plays with the time, and he extends some notes. But
you're right about the vocals too. Something that was so seminal about this album was what Elvis did with his vocals, because obviously you've got to think previously. This is something that the producer said as well. He said that in the 40s and 50s, music was about the voice. It was about whoever was singing it. What they wanted to do with this album, they treated Elvis's voice like one of the instruments.
Yeah.
It is obviously louder than the rest of the instruments because he's singing the lyrics, but it still fits in so much more with the band.
And I believe you can hear the guitar at pretty much the same level. His acoustic guitar pretty much the same level as the vocals. And as you said, I mean, there's the electric guitar. That's an important part of the album for me. The how clean the instruments sound, even though the quality of the recording is not that good. For the drums, you pretty much can hear the snare and not much else. It's the snare keeping the beat and keeping the 2 and 4 very strong, very rock and roll. Yeah. But the double bass, it's quite low in the mix because they didn't have the technology to kind of boost the bass as we do nowadays. And there was a double bass which doesn't have any sustain comparing to
an electric guitar,
electric bass.
If you like to know,
but they sound clean. They sound nice and clean,
and you can make them out in the mix.
Yes.
Interestingly, for anyone who doesn't know how recordings were done in these days, it would literally be a case of trial and error. They would set up the band in one room. Normally there'd be only 1 or 2 microphones about. So they'd have a microphone at the front of the room. Then imagine this, picture this, if you live, wherever you're listening from, if you're in your living room, picture this. Put your microphone at one end of the room, take 2 steps back and put Elvis and his guitar. Take 1 step back and put the electric guitar. Take another step back, put the double bass, and take 2 or 3 more steps back and put the drums.
Those were the faders, isn't it?
That's
on the mixing desk. Instead of moving up and down, you put people in different positions.
That's exactly what they said. They said they weren't happy with the level of the bass, so they asked him to come forward a bit.
That's insane.
Nowadays, obviously, you can do so much with the technology.
Big bands, when they recorded that, if you were playing a solo, you would walk towards the front of the studio and get close to the microphone. So sometimes you can hear trumpet getting louder because the solo is starting and getting quieter as a musician. So interesting that obviously they use the same sort of technique. But as I said, they want the vocals to be clear enough, but it's not too loud. It's not much louder than everything else. I think before we go through the songs, a couple of things that I consider about this album, a couple of things that I was thinking about when listening to it is, for me, nothing in this album is too far from the blues.
Yeah, that's
it's almost like a commercial blues album more than anything else.
He's taken the blues and he's stylistically applied different genres to each song.
Yeah.
So there might be one that's a blues ballad. There might be one that's kind of more rock and roll. There'll be a doo-wop as well.
Yeah.
But it's all based in the blues.
Yeah, and
which is expected. Yeah, you're making the transition from one genre to another.
It's mostly blues. You can't. It doesn't go away from the blues too much. But you have elements there of country, of soul, gospel. For me, even though the blues is more evident, the album sums up all American music to that date.
Wow, yeah.
I think that's why it's important. Either if people like Elvis or not, if think he was the greatest or not. But
that's a very good statement, man. I agree.
It does sum up everything that has been done in American popular music to that date. It's got all those elements there, kind of in the background, and the blues. But
even if there isn't an obvious jazz song in there, I've made notes.
You got some jazzy guitars.
The guitar, that's what I made notes of. The guitar, some of the chords they're playing, the rrhythms he's playing, the finger plucking he's using is jazzy, man.
Yeah, who's on guitar? Who's on guitar?
On guitar is Scotty Moore. Right. Who played with Elvis for a few years. Then on drums is a guy called DJ Fontana.
Yes, DJ Fontana.
I'm not actually sure who's on bass. They didn't interview him in the episode. But that was the band for Elvis's first few years. They were really tight knit.
We should add this to the notes at the end of the episode. We usually leave some links for you guys to.
When I do the description, I'll say who's in the band,
and maybe find even whatever the Wikipedia page for the musicians, because it's really good to look into those guys.
And if they've done any solo music, I'll put them in the playlist just in case Scotty Moore's done his thing.
Yeah, it's good to do that. Also, one more thing I want to say. I mean, there's the lyrics, right? I took note about this, which is one of the titles, so I didn't forget. I'm going to sit right down and cry over you. That, for me, is pure teenage love.
Yeah.
It's naive.
Yeah.
So you've got that, but Blue Suede Shoes is a bit of like having a laugh, isn't it? Because it's like, you do whatever, but you don't step on my blue suede shoes.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of comedy, there's a bit of humor in there.
Yeah.
And you have that naive teenage love, and you have a more aggressive approach to like, no, I want you as well. Like, I'm a man, you're a woman, I want you to be with me. So you got different forms of expressing love, and you got a bit of humor, a touch of humor in it. So for me, in that album, Elvis is inviting us all to sing, dance, have a laugh, and fall in love.
Beautiful. Yeah,
that's what the album is.
It is. I mean, on every occasion. And what makes this even more interesting is that just so everyone knows, and this is how things were back in those days, Elvis didn't write any of those songs.
Yeah.
Those songs were all in the charts or from Elvis's childhood. He chose them all.
So it's not, it didn't have a...
Well, the executives sent him a list. No, they sent him a list and said, Elvis, here are 10 songs we think might work well for you for this upcoming session.
Well,
they sent him about 5 or 6 lists. And from those lists, he only ever chose 1 or 2 songs. And then the rest of the songs he chose because he'd remembered those songs from his childhood or he'd heard them in the charts a few months back and he just wanted to sing them his way.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that wonderful? He got to choose which songs he would cover and do it in his own way. And
probably he simply knew all the lyrics by heart and everything.
That's it, because like we said, he was listening to his radio every day as a teenager.
So it does come from the heart, doesn't it? It's a silly thing to say. It's cheesy, but it's true. Right. It comes from the heart.
This whole thing all started back in 1954 because Elvis did a cover of a black musician called Arthur Crudup, and the song was called That's All Right. We'll put Arthur and Elvis's version in the playlist. But what was so important is that the black community had access to this song, Elvis's version of it, and they loved it.
So
it went down incredibly well.
That's how you become the king, isn't it? Because he made black music accessible to white people, but he also pleased the black community.
Yeah.
How do you do that at that time in 1956? How do you connect those two worlds? You know,
that's it.
Isn't it the power of music destroying the segregation at the time?
He was accused of cultural appropriation at that time.
Oh, that time they talked about that. Interesting.
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
but and
I think it was the white people who weren't happy.
They were not happy for him being too black.
Yeah, and singing black people's songs.
Which it's interesting.
But isn't that a statement? Because on the album, 2 of the songs are covers of black musicians.
Yeah.
He does Tutti Frutti by Little Richard and I Got a Woman by Ray Charles.
Actually, his version of Tutti Frutti is just
brilliant,
so
isn't it?
Good.
But I think isn't that a wonderful thing that in that day and age...
It's not too different from the original. It's just like, I just want to play the song.
But I mean, in that day and age where segregation was such a huge part of everyone's life in America, that Elvis thought, well, music's music. Music connects all of us, whether we like it or not. So I'm not going to be embarrassed or ashamed
of doing what I want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And cover the songs I want to sing.
And if you have 2 ways of seeing those things. One is like, oh, you want to make a profit out of someone else's culture, or whatever. Or you say, I'm going to bring their culture into my culture and become one thing, make it become just one thing and more powerful than it was originally, and make it more accessible. So I believe, in either way, it doesn't matter what you think. I believe he was doing what he wanted to do and what he believed was the best thing to do, and he loved that music.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
I was talking about having an A&R. For people who don't know what is that, A&R is the department in a record label that's called Artist and Repertoire. So basically, you have people in a record label. At that time, that was even stronger than it is nowadays. You have those people telling the artist what they should record. And it's like, you're not a songwriter, we got these songs for you. And you got to sing this, you got to sing that. And if Elvis made that, made clear his position, saying, I'm going to sing these songs because these are the ones that I really, I can really feel connected to. So well done.
Well, the thing is, the producers knew what they had as well. We said this earlier, that they knew Elvis was like a star in the making. But whilst Elvis definitely did do it for his love of the music, the producers definitely had some marketing in mind. Sam Phillips said this: Elvis was the perfect man for the transition, for the black person getting a broader reception, and to help the white person feel like, hey, we've got a relationship with the black people.
So he actually wanted to
bridge
make a thing out of that.
Yeah.
So
isn't that incredible? Because it's on such a small level. When you think about the politics behind it, it takes a lot more than one album to unite two different ethnicities.
Yeah, especially in America.
In America, in the 50s, at those times. But God, did this album do it. The reception that it got from both communities was fantastic. And essentially, do you remember in the first episode we spoke how rock and roll did bridge the racial divides in those times?
I think
it was something that both black and white people could connect with. It had influences of both communities in one form of music.
And it's interesting because the music's so powerful, and if you just want to dance to it, you're going to dance to it. You don't care. You don't care where it's coming from. You don't care. You're not going to analyze and divide and think about culture and think about the background and think about appropriation. You just want to dance and have a good time.
Should I dance to this? I'm a white person and this song was written by a black person. No, you just dance, man.
Or
music is music.
Exactly. That guy doesn't belong to my, ethnical background, so I can't dance to his music.
No, rubbish.
Your body's going to tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
You can't.
Do you know a quick little fact as well? You know the famous thing Elvis where he's on his heels and he does the shaking of his legs? Everyone thinks that's that he was told to do that, or I'll get a good reception from doing that. In the interview at the end of the episode, when all the credits were rolling, he says, he goes, some folks say that I think that I do that just to get the people all excited, but man, when the music flows through me, I just got to do it. So he just his legs shake. The famous video of him shaking his legs and going on his tiptoes and moving his whole body. Elvis felt the music flow through him.
That's it. And he couldn't stop dancing.
No, he couldn't. Anyway, is there any songs you want to talk about on the album? Because there's 12 of them. I don't think we have to talk about all of them.
We can't talk about all of them, really.
There's some good ones. Well, they're all good, but there's some noticeable ones.
Yeah, well, I would start with Blue Suede Shoes. I mean, if we're following the order of the album, we're going to skip a few songs.
But that's fine, yeah.
What I think about that song and what it makes it so important, especially being right at the beginning of the album, is the vocal leads the song.
Yes.
So it's all about the main melody, the main riff is played by the vocals. So there's no room for any instrument or anything else to become not even as important as the vocals. It's all about the way he's singing it, the way he's playing with the melody. And it's a strong, and as I said, there's loads of humor in there. Yeah. I mean, that's him having a laugh. Don't step on my blue suede shoes.
You can do anything. But lay off of those blue suede shoes.
Exactly. And it's got two elements where I think it's important: is the swing, the shuffle swing for all the musicians out there.
Anyone who's not a musician, do you want to quickly talk about?
Well, the swing. Well, basically, when you play a straight rhythm, is when you can count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So I'm tapping here to show that's a straight. If you swing it, you're gonna increase the gap in a certain point. Basically, instead of subdividing your beat in 2 parts, you're subdividing 3, but you still play 2 out of those 3. It's harder to explain to actually play. So if you play 1 and 2 with no swing, this is a straight. If you swing it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
Do it with an underlying 4/4 beat. Say the 4/4 beat. 1, 2. So do straight.
So straight. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and shuffle. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. So that obviously when he plays fast songs.
Yeah.
So that's a shuffle feel. Shuffle feel is something that you have in jazz and blues more than anything else. And so he's got that element of the blues. Even the really fast songs, you can tell it's swung. It's not straight. Most of the songs are swung. And in this song in particular, you have the starts and stops, which is a big thing.
Yes, I had noticed that as well. Yeah.
Starts and stops. You sing a line and when the band stops, and then the band kicks off again and stops again for you to sing another line and keeps going. So that's a really strong element. Yeah.
Brilliant. What's next up? So the next song is "I'm Counting on You," which is actually almost a complete different end of the rock and roll spectrum, isn't it? It's a ballad. The acoustic guitar is so predominant in that song, and the backing vocals, they're so doo-woppy, aren't they? Like just
The BVs, yeah, that's the only song for me that I think I could notice the BVs as something important. I don't even know
agree.
if there's any other BVs in the album.
I don't think there's too much. No.
So it's just like, and that they made a thing out of it, and you can see the gospel influence, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah. We already mentioned track 3, which is I Got a Woman, which is the Ray Charles cover.
Yeah, and important again, let's mention, has a country groove, kind of, it sounds very country to me the way they play it. And the stops, again, starts and stops. If you listen to Elmore James, you listen to a song called Talk to Me Baby. And I can clearly hear Elvis's music there, which obviously Elmore James came first.
Yeah.
So just say Elvis probably borrowed from him
Elmore James.
as well.
We'll put that one in the
yeah, please do so.
playlist.
Yeah. Talk to Me Baby, because it's all based on starts and stops. That one.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. After that, you wanted to talk a bit about One-Sided Love Affair.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That one. Because that's a different approach, because we're talking about love songs, and when you have the teenage approach, which is like I'm totally in love with you, I need to do everything to have you with me, whatever. He's got loads of that in the album, like desperate for that girl.
Yeah.
But in this song, it's like, if you want to be kissed, you need to kiss me too. So it's not like, it's not one-sided. It's not like you got to decide what was going to happen. So he's being a bit demanding,
Yeah.
He's saying to that woman, like, I want you to be with me, but you got to do some work, It's not,
and that's
not me going after you. You need to come after me as well.
And that's not teenage content.
Yeah.
That's adult stuff.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So it's more like an adult
content. Exactly.
Talking to another. It's like, okay, we want to try to build something here. I don't know if it's just a relationship or if it's something that's not going to last, but it's a two-way thing.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's quite different.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to talk about One-Sided Love Affair is, and actually this relates to the whole album, is the importance of Elvis's vocals in this album. And we spoke already about how they brought the vocals back and they didn't make it so obvious and so loud. But the vocal tricks and mannerisms that Elvis had learned from previous singers before him, like scatting. Like, I can't even think, I'm not a vocalist. I have to ask my wife because she's a vocalist. But it's like in let me find it. In One-Sided Love Affair, he does that thing where he goes, "You've got to love me too," like that. Just little inflations on the end of the words, and he does other bits and pieces throughout the album as well. Okay. I mean, it really is wonderful. I mean, I remember reading as well that with this album, the band had an input as well, which I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So the whole thing was, they probably, let's say for each one song, they probably spent, according to the producer, about 1 hour doing each song, and they do it over and over again. And apparently Elvis, it would vary. Sometimes it would be 10 minutes, sometimes it would be an hour, sometimes half an hour. Elvis would say, "We're in the groove now. I know what I want to do. You guys are playing it at the perfect tempo. I like the feel. Let's do this properly." And so they had these sort of jam sessions for each song so that Elvis would feel at his most comfortable. And that's why I think it's safe to say you are hearing Elvis at his most comfortable and therefore performing at his best.
And as you record live, unlike most albums nowadays, the whole vibe has to be there and it has to be perfect. You got to have a perfect take where each musician and the singer are doing their best.
They're on it, yeah.
If one of them is not there, then you got to do another take.
Yeah.
So that
and Elvis actually didn't mind if there were mistakes. He said, "No, I had a good vocal take on that one. We'll keep it."
There you
like
go.
That. The other thing, I mean, he also asked the band their opinion. Often they'd finish a take and he said, "I like that. What did you guys think?" And they'd say, "Yeah, no, it was good."
I think, and you can hear the way he plays the guitar. It sounds like part of a band.
Certainly.
It doesn't sound like he's a singer with a band. They do sound connected, which is pretty cool.
I mean, tracks 5 and 6, the only thing I had to note about them was listen to the electric guitar, because over those two tracks, on track 5, the guitar plays these little staccato chords, and staccato, for anyone who doesn't know, is playing short, sharp notes. It doesn't necessarily mean loud. It's just like,
they don't last for...
No, so if you're going to B, it'd be... that, that.
Yeah, they stop quickly.
Stop quickly. You rest them, and the guitar is doing this wonderful little thing, and it's so hard to hear. It's so low in the mix. Or he was stood far back for this song.
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
and then track 6 as well. The jazz guitar. There's a lovely bit of jazz electric playing in there, which is really good.
Track 6?
Just because.
Just because. Like. Yeah.
And Tutti Frutti.
Yeah, it's
track
a fast-paced country, isn't it?
Just because.
Yes. No, I was just saying. Again, you have the country element there. I mean, you might even say it's not country, but I can hear country music.
I think there's country. I think all the fast-paced songs have some country influence in them.
You can hear the train groove.
And it's part of the drums, part of the acoustic guitar, part of the electric guitar. Yeah. Tutti Frutti is track 7, which is actually a Little Richard cover. Again, Elvis tipping his hat to his favourite black musicians and saying, "Thanks for this song. I think I'll cover it." That's a good cover as well. The other songs, I mean, I don't really have much to say about the others. I really love his vocal performance on Blue Moon. He sings really high on that one.
And that's a beautiful song. That's a standard song. That's a song that's been recorded.
Yeah, and again, he's put his own
It's
stamp
not
on it.
easy to pick a song like that and make it special, make it more special than it already is. And wow.
Yeah. Brilliant album. I mean, it has changed the course of music history.
Yeah.
And it really has. I mean, this is what Keith Richards had to say about it. It's like the world went from black and white to Technicolor.
Wow.
After having heard that album.
Wow.
And again, I know we had Elvis before this album, but let's consider this Elvis's first stamp on music.
Yeah.
John Lennon said, before Elvis, there was nothing. Which we know there was stuff. There was some great jazz going
and
about.
Elvis wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah, we know that there's great. But I mean, that's, for John Lennon, the lead singer of the most famous pop band in the world, it does kind of mean something.
It does.
Because music was quite specialised, wasn't it? There was big band stuff, there was jazz, there was blues. I wouldn't say much of those stuff were pop or accessible.
But if you're a true rocker like John Lennon, there was nothing before Elvis. That makes a lot of sense because that's rock and roll. And John Lennon, especially in his early years as a songwriter, he was 100% rock and roll, nothing more,
No, definitely.
And so there's nothing before Elvis in that sense. I do think, I have to say this, I do think Chuck Berry deserves to be called the King of Rock as well.
Chuck Berry's nickname is the Godfather of rock and roll, and Elvis is the King of rock and roll. Do you think it should be the other way around?
No, I didn't. That's funny because I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Godfather. So that makes sense. Yeah,
Chuck Berry was the Godfather of rock and roll, and Elvis is the King of rock and roll.
If you
Do you feel those titles are okay?
They are okay as long as you consider the Godfather is as important as the King. So
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I believe it makes a lot of sense.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a good place to end the episode. Again, it's a short album. But you just go and listen to it because it's fun. And
it's all there.
As
Elvis
you said,
is there.
Elvis is there, and he's presenting most music that led up to that moment in one concise album. And I think that's so important because another quote I read, or something they mentioned on this TV thing, was that in those days, the youth of America, be them black or white, they didn't have any music to associate themselves with. There was nothing new coming out. The World War II generation, they had big band, they had jazz. The ones before that had blues. But the generation afterwards didn't have anything. So for there to be a new genre of music called rock and roll that came out when they were teenagers, that was something that all the kids could get behind.
And at the post-war period where Europe was in a terrible economic collapse, and America was booming.
Yes.
So that was the time for America to establish itself as the most important or the most influential country in the Western world. And Elvis was the face of
pop music and rock and roll. Because let's not forget, we've also got Motown and soul coming out of America as well, but different parts of the country. But
he was the king.
Yes, he was the king. Is there any way you want to sum up this album? Any final words you want to say about it?
Yeah, what I want to say is, I think Elvis is one of those iconic characters that everyone knows. And we were talking about this. It's like Lady Di or the Queen or
Frank Sinatra.
Or, you got some iconic faces that every person on Earth or on the Western world at least would recognize. Elvis is one of those because he was an actor. He could dance, and he was really good with the interviews, great sense of humor. So he was a strong character that everyone loved. But you go back to this album and remind yourself that he always started with music.
Yeah.
You know, he became the king of pop culture and rock, but Elvis, the musician, it's there right at the beginning, right at the first album, and it's really good.
Brilliant. Well, great to end there, man. One thing I just want to say is my take on this album, because I think it's such an important album, is that for me, this album was a bridge between two hugely different cultures in a time where the division and segregation of those cultures was so obvious, really, to say that. There was an obvious divide. So for an album by a white person to be the bridge, I think was so important. Black lyrics and black music presented and executed by a white man.
Yeah.
That wasn't normal for those times. So I think it's so important that it got out there and that both communities enjoyed it.
Which means that music is stronger than
politics.
Yeah.
And musically, I mean, Elvis was allowed the freedom and control to implement the music and the style that he wanted on each of those songs. He knew that he loved that song that Carl Perkins did, so he wanted to take it and put his own twist on it. And his exposure to the black culture fueled his love for the black gospel, the soul, the R&B music, and essentially his music was allowed to thrive and become white man's rock and roll, thanks to his exposure to the black community's music that he listened to and spent so much of his time listening to. And there you have a new genre of music, essentially.
So in like, doesn't matter what you think about this album, or if you believe that Elvis got even better albums, but this one was iconic. And
I don't think we'll talk about a more important album in rock and roll history.
In rock and roll, no.
Yeah.
No.
And when I say rock and roll, we mean rock and roll, the music genre. There might be an important album in heavy metal that we talk about, or
there's
an
a
important
distinction
album in
between
blues.
rock and roll. Right? So we're talking about rock and roll. That's
in the
one.
musical genre of rock and roll. This is without a doubt the most important album because it created the damn thing. That's why, yeah. But anyway, guys, right? Thank you very much for tuning into another episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. As usual, you can find us on our socials. We are at Long Live RNR Pod on Instagram and Twitter. And you can search the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast on Facebook and YouTube. If you're using an Apple podcast, we'd really love a review because it helps us on the charts and it helps us with the algorithms and get seen more. But anything you'd like to like and share and subscribe to would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much from me.
Yeah, thanks for following us. Thanks for being with us again. And I hope you enjoyed the show. And, stay tuned. Check all the information we have available for you. But for now, Laz and Philippe are going to leave the building. So keep on rocking, everyone.
And as usual, long live rock and roll.